Hello, wine fanatics. Stephen here for the Napa Valley Wine Academy content team with my weekly update on what is new in membership. So, the last 2 weeks, we've been in the Loire Valley as our focus. We're going to move across the country of France to Beaujolais, where we're going to have a theme for a week of all things Beaujolais. So, first of all, we've got some maps, and they're our very awesome topographical maps. So, we have our regular border maps, which show exactly where you can grow the grapes and call it Beaujolais. But then we've also got our sub-regions as well. So Beaujolais famously has its 10 crus, and these are all highlighted here. So there's some of them do overlap. So for example, my French is always terrible, but you've got Brully and then Côte de Brully. So Côte de Brully is the hilly part, of course, of Brully there. Now, what I learned from this map that I found really, really interesting is I'd always heard about how all the wines of just regular Beaujolais in the south, it's all on the flat land, and you can see on the side here where we do have this purple color here. That is where regular Beaujolais is grown, and then the green color beside it is where we have Beaujolais Village. But in the very south of Beaujolais, it is actually quite hilly, and I really wouldn't call this flat at all. So I think that the idea of this flatness actually comes from this area here to the east. So I found that really, really interesting because, some parts of regular Beaujolais, quite hilly. So that's what I took away from this map. We also have some great grapes to cover, including Gamay, obviously. But the one that I wanted to draw your attention to, it's grown in very tiny amounts in Beaujolais, is Aligot, and it's currently grown there. However, next year, 2024, basically, if you're trying to grow it for Beaujolais, you can't call it Beaujolais if you're using this grape. It's a bit of a shame because, yes, most of the time when people try it, it's just a really high acid grape that some would even call neutral, as we've mentioned here. But if you give it a bit of time, the grape can develop quite nicely and develop flavors of honey and nuts. It was really actually hard to get hold of information for this grape. So we consulted an expert on the grape to get their view on it. So really cool information there that's not always easy to get. So that's Beaujolais for the week. We've also got a whole heap of really cool videos. We had Peter Marks about a week and a half ago, interview Jean-Charles Caz from Chateau Lynch-Barge, the famous winery from Bordeaux, and they talked, it was really intimate actually, talked about the family and the upbringing and the evolution of the winery. And I found the family stories fascinating because his great-grandfather bought the winery, I think back in the 30s, back in the day, and he was a baker. And so this amazingly famous winery, less than 100 years ago, it could be purchased just when you were a baker. Just get in the wine industry. So I found that really cool. And also, Jean-Charles Caz is a surfer, which I think is great. Peter Marks also did a masterclass at Napa HQ where he looked at Napa versus Sonoma. So really, I can't think of anyone better to look at Californian wines. So he's able to compare the two regions, probably California's most famous regions. So about 2 hours. So it really goes quite in depth. So check that out, particularly if you're interested in California wine. And of course, Wine Masters TV did a great piece on Piemonte, talking about the grapes, geography, where it is. It's a great little class. They're really excellent educators. It's fun, it's informative, it's really well done. And they do a little experiment, which I found fascinating, with sulfites, because there's a lot of myths about sulfites. And so they set about trying to really provide context to that and dispel some myths. So check that one out. And finally, we do have our weekly cocktail. We have bought tequila on board. So if you're keeping up with this, week 19, it's time to buy yourself a bottle of tequila, because the most famous tequila cocktail will be made this week, and it is the margarita. So we've actually included two cocktails for this, two recipes, I should say. The first is the classic margarita, and then we've also got Tommy's margarita, which often I find is a little more prevalent these days in particularly Mexican restaurants. They're more likely to do Tommy's margarita as opposed to your traditional. Personally, for me, the traditional cocktail, a little less sweet, a little more flavoursome, is my preference. So, but drink what you like. Right, so have a fantastic week. Drink something tasty, ideally a lovely glass of wine or a margarita, and jump onto membership, and we will see you next week. Cheers.